When the patrol boat found the skiff, it was not the storm that looked murderous, but the calm. The water around Breaker Strait lay flat as poured metal, and the fog sat so low it seemed to press the sea into a single smooth sheet. Officer Kellen Rourke noticed the craft because it kept drifting in a slow, exhausted circle, as if it had forgotten how to pick a direction. A hand-painted number on the stern had been scrubbed away. The oarlocks were empty. Someone had tried to row and then stopped. When the patrol boat drew near, a child's voice rose out of the fog, thin, steady, almost polite. "If you have a blanket, please bring it first," the voice said. "My mother is cold, and the metal in your steps will scare her." Kellen hesitated because it was a strange thing to say, and then he saw her. A girl no older than 9, crouched in the bow, one arm around a woman whose skin was the color of wet ash. The woman's lips were cracked, her hair stiff with salt, her hands trembling as though still tied. The girl wore an orange raincoat 2 sizes too big and a radio strapped to her chest with twine. Its speaker hissed softly. A home-built thing with a bent antenna and a dial made from a bottle cap. "I'm Maris," she added, like a name could be an anchor. "We are not armed. We are not contagious. We are hungry. Please don't shout." Kellen moved the way you move toward an animal that might bolt. He held up his hands. He gave them the blanket. In the later footage, the cameras would focus on the moment he lifted the woman, Saren Vale, into his arms, but Maris remembered something else. The faint click when her radio caught a distant Coast Guard frequency, a calm voice saying, "Visual contact confirmed," and the knowledge that once you are seen, you can be owned by whoever gets to tell the story first. Alderport loved to tell stories about itself. It called its waterfront the Crown, its old warehouses the Archive District, and its skyline the Lanterns, because the glass towers lit up at dusk like upright candles. People there believed in clean narratives. Heroes in uniforms, villains in shadows, victims who stayed grateful. They did not like stories with jagged edges. When Saren Vale's name hit the emergency channel, those jagged edges began to tear at the city's careful seams. Saren had been a rising composer once, the kind of musician the city claimed as proof of its sophistication. The girl from the docks who learned to make a piano sound like tidewater. 7 years earlier, she vanished on a ferry route that should have been ordinary. There were candlelight vigils, then silence, then a resigned myth. Talented people leave, talented people are lost. Now she was back, pulled from a nameless skiff, and the Port Authority could not keep journalists away from the hospital doors. They filmed the ambulance like it was a parade float. They fought over angles. They wanted the face of tragedy made simple. Maris saw them when the patrol boat docked. She saw the hungry lenses and the microphones shaped like weapons. She pressed herself closer to her mother and set her radio to a frequency she'd learned in the camps, the one used by smugglers to coordinate deliveries. It wasn't there only static. Still, the habit remained. Listen first, speak second. A reporter leaned in too close and asked, "Is that your daughter?" Saren's eyelids fluttered, and the terror that lived under her skin surged to the surface. She tried to sit up, and the medic held her down gently. Maris answered instead. "She is my mother," she said. "That is enough. Your question is not for her." The reporter blinked, offended by a child's authority. The cameraman zoomed in on Maris's mouth as if it held a headline. Kellen's jaw tightened. He guided them through a side entrance. But Alderport had already begun to chew. The Vale family arrived like a storm with paperwork. Ingrid Vale, Saren's elder sister, wore a white blazer with the sharpness of a blade and smiled the way charities smiled in brochures. She brought flowers with printed cards, a lawyer with a leather briefcase, and a security team that walked as if the hallway belonged to them. She thanked the hospital staff in a voice meant for witnesses. "Our family is profoundly grateful," she said. "We will ensure Saren receives the best care. And we will, of course, cooperate with authorities to bring the criminals to justice." Behind her, a man from the Foundation's public relations unit whispered into his phone, already shaping a press release. Ingrid's gaze moved to Maris with the thin fascination of someone looking at a stain. It was not hatred. It was calculation. What does this child mean for our image, our grief, our funding, our control? "Hello," Ingrid said to Maris, lowering herself to the child's eye level as if performing tenderness. "You must be frightened." Maris kept her hand on the radio strap and said, "I am alert." Ingrid's smile faltered, and then returned brighter, as if overcoming a flaw in lighting. "Of course you are. Brave girl." She extended a manicured hand toward Saren's bed. Saren, half awake, recoiled at the sudden movement, eyes wide, breaths shallow, the way she had in the camps whenever a man reached toward her without warning. Ingrid's hand paused midair, and then retreated. Trauma, Ingrid murmured to the lawyer, as if naming it made her compassionate. We'll need specialists, and we'll need to remove triggers. Her eyes flicked back to Maris. We'll do what is best for Saren. It was the first time Maris heard her own existence described as an object. Best for Saren meant, not you. Saren slept for 3 days under a curtain of medication, and when she woke, the world had been rearranged around her. The room smelled of lemon polish and expensive flowers. There were no journalists now, only a tinted window and a security guard outside the door. Maris sat in the corner chair, knees drawn up, radio dismantled and reassembled twice out of pure instinct. A nurse had tried to take it earlier. Maris had looked at her calmly and said, "This kept us alive. Don't confuse your rules with my surrender." The nurse, unnerved by the adultness in the child's tone, left it alone. Saren's eyes opened and found Maris. For a second, relief flickered, then grief crushed it. Saren's gaze slid past Maris toward the window as if the child's face could summon the cage they'd escaped. "Maris," Saren whispered, voice raw. "Are we here?" "We are in a hospital," Maris said, "in the city with the lantern buildings." Saren swallowed. Her fingers trembled under the sheet. "And Ingrid?" "She came," Maris answered. "She brought lawyers." Saren's face tightened, an expression that was both shame and fury. "She always brings lawyers." Saren tried to sit up and winced, then looked at Maris's hands. The child's knuckles were scarred. Her nails were bitten. Her palms held the thickened skin of someone who hauled nets and carried crates. Saren's lips moved as if to apologize, but words got stuck. Instead, she asked, "Did they say anything to you?" Maris hesitated. In the camps, hesitation could get you punished. In the city, it could get you separated. She chose precision. "They said they would do what is best for you," she said. "And they looked at me like I was a receipt they didn't remember signing." Saren closed her eyes. A tear slipped down the side of her face and disappeared into the pillow. "I never wanted you to be proof," she said. "I wanted you to be a person." Maris's throat tightened. "Then keep being my mother," she said, and the plea in her voice startled her because she hadn't allowed herself to say it aloud before. Saren's hand moved toward Maris and then stopped short, hovering, as if touch might burn them both. The door opened. Ingrid stepped in with a folder. Saren flinched. Ingrid saw it and softened her voice like silk. "Darling," she said, "you're safe. We're taking you home." Saren whispered. "Home," as if tasting a word that could poison. Ingrid sat, laid the folder on the bed, and spoke in a low, controlled tone. "The police have questions. The media is feral. We need to protect you from public scrutiny. That means strict boundaries, minimal visitors, therapy, rest, and..." Ingrid glanced at Maris again. "No unnecessary stressors." Saren's eyes flicked to Maris and then away, and Maris understood with a sick clarity that her mother had been trained for years to choose survival over love. The city would ask Saren to choose again. They did not separate Maris and Saren with shouting or handcuffs. Alderport's child services had rules, and Ingrid knew how to bend rules without snapping them. A social worker named Priya Mensa arrived with a clipboard and a tired kindness that looked nothing like charity. Priya sat on the floor so she wasn't towering over Maris and asked soft questions. "What do you remember? What do you need to feel safe? Has anyone hurt you since you arrived?" Maris answered in full sentences with the careful honesty of someone who knew that vagueness invites other people's interpretations. Priya listened without flinching. When Maris finished, Priya looked at Ingrid's lawyer. "The child's primary attachment is to her mother," Priya said. "Separating them abruptly would be harmful." The lawyer smiled politely. "We understand," he said. "We are not requesting separation. We are requesting stabilization. Saren Vale is experiencing severe post-traumatic symptoms. Any association with the captivity may be re-traumatizing. We propose temporary alternative placement with supervised contact as clinically appropriate." Priya's pen paused. Ingrid leaned in. "We love Saren," she said, voice shaking at exactly the right frequency for cameras that weren't even there. "We want her to heal. We can't risk her spiraling. We can't risk another disappearance." Priya's eyes narrowed. And the child's needs? Ingrid's gaze did not waver. The child's needs will be met, she said. Not by placing her inside Saren's trauma. Saren, listening from the bed, began to breathe faster. Maris saw her mother's hands clutch the sheet like a lifeline. Maris knew the smell of panic, knew the way it made a person flee, even from people who meant well. She stood up, walked to the bed, and placed her small palm over Saren's clenched fingers. "Look at me," Maris said softly. Saren's eyes found hers. For a second, Saren's breathing slowed. Ingrid watched this and tightened her jaw. Later in the official report, the decision would read like a neutral compromise. Saren Vale transferred to a private recovery residence. Child placed temporarily in a licensed transitional home. Supervised weekly contact recommended pending psychiatric evaluation. In reality, it was the oldest trick. Call an act of removal a form of care. When Priya told Maris she would be staying somewhere safe for a little while, Maris asked, "Will my mother be told where I am?" Priya hesitated. Ingrid answered for her. "Only when it's healthy," Ingrid said. Maris nodded like she understood, but inside, something went cold and steady. If people could hide information behind the word healthy, then truth was a resource to be rationed, and Maris would have to learn how to mine it. The transitional home was a converted Victorian house in the Northern District, painted pale blue with white trim, the kind of building that tried to look cheerful by imitating childhood storybooks. Inside, it smelled of soup, bleach, and old carpet. The other kids carried different kinds of caution, some loud and aggressive, some so quiet they disappeared into corners. Maris chose quiet. She learned the schedules. She noted which staff members smiled and which ones watched too hard. She kept her radio under her pillow and told herself she was only staying until Saren came for her, because believing in anything else would make her stomach split. A week later, Priya visited and brought news wrapped in gentle language. Saren was not ready. Saren needed time. Ingrid had filed for emergency guardianship of Saren's medical decisions and temporary custody of Maris, framed as a legal necessity until paternity could be clarified. "Paternity," Maris repeated. Priya's mouth tightened. "They want to know if there is any other family who could claim you," she said. Maris laughed once, a dry sound that surprised them both. "In the camps," she said, "family is whoever doesn't trade you." Priya's eyes softened. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Maris wanted to ask Priya if apologies were currency or comfort. Instead, she asked for a pencil, and when Priya handed it over, Maris drew a map of Breaker Strait from memory currents, fog pockets, lighthouse beam patterns, because maps were how she reminded herself that places were real and escape routes existed. That night, when the other kids slept, Maris tuned her radio and listened. The city's public frequencies were crowded with chatter. Taxis, construction crews, fishermen arguing about nets. Underneath, faint and intermittent, she heard a different kind of talk. Numbers, times, code words, spoken with the bored confidence of people who assumed no one listened. 2 crates, midnight, a voice said. White fish. Maris's hand stilled on the dial. In the camps, white fish had meant girls with pale skin. In Alderport, it might mean something else. Or it might mean the same thing in a new accent. Maris lay back, staring at the ceiling, and realized the sea had not ended their story. It had only changed the scenery. School was the next battleground. The transitional home enrolled Maris in North Lake Primary, where the classrooms smelled of markers and optimism. The principal introduced Maris as a brave young survivor and told the students to be welcoming, as if kindness could be scheduled. For 2 weeks, the children watched Maris like she was a live documentary. Some asked questions with blunt fascination. Some avoided her. One boy offered her a granola bar and asked if she had ever killed anyone. Maris said, "No," and watched the boy look disappointed. The teachers tried to be careful, which often meant they were clumsy. A counselor invited Maris to talk about her feelings and put a box of tissues on the table like a trap. Maris stared at it and said, "Crying did not help me before. Why would it help me now?" The counselor, startled, asked where she had learned to speak like that. Maris shrugged. "People talk when they want to be believed," she said. "I learned which words make adults stop asking." In the library, Maris found an old manual on basic electronics and a dusty box of broken radios. The librarian, Mr. Sue, was a quiet man who smelled of tea and paper. He watched Maris open the box, select a cracked capacitor, and begin explaining to herself, under her breath, what it might be useful for. "You know what you're doing," he said. Maris didn't look up. "I know what I need," she replied. Mr. Shu brought her a soldering iron and did not ask for her story. That alone made him safer than most people. After school, Maris stayed late and repaired the library's old intercom that had been broken for months. The principal praised her publicly. The other kids started calling her Radio Girl, like it was both compliment and warning. Maris didn't correct them. Names were handles. Handles could be used to pull you closer or shove you away. She would decide, eventually, which it would be. 2 months after the rescue, Saren's face appeared on a billboard by the harbor. The Vale Foundation announced a concert series called Return, proceeds supporting anti-trafficking initiatives and survivor wellness. Saren was photographed in soft lighting, eyes downcast, hair brushed, wrists hidden. The caption called her an icon of resilience. It did not mention Maris. On television, Ingrid sat beside a charity host and spoke about courage. She said Saren was recovering privately. She said the family was committed to healing. She did not say that Saren's phone was controlled, her visitors screened, her therapy sessions monitored by foundation staff disguised as assistants. Priya discovered this slowly, the way you find rot behind fresh paint. A missed appointment, a canceled visit, a doctor who stopped answering calls. "This isn't just about trauma," Priya told Maris one afternoon. They sat on a park bench while winter sun made the lake look like glass. Priya's hands were wrapped around a coffee cup, knuckles white. "They're managing a narrative," she said. Maris looked at the ducks and asked, "Are you allowed to fight them?" Priya's mouth twisted. "I'm allowed to advocate," she said. "I'm allowed to document. Fighting is complicated." Maris nodded. In the camps, fighting was also complicated. It required patience, timing, allies, and the ability to endure the long parts where nothing looked like victory. That night, Maris tuned her radio again. The coded voices returned. One mentioned the Meridian, Ingrid's mansion, in a tone that sounded familiar. Maris wrote the word down in a notebook. Mr. Shu had given her. She drew a line from the harbor to the archive district to the Meridian. She remembered how Ingrid's lawyers moved like smugglers, confident, protected, invisible in plain sight. She remembered the reporter's question on the dock. "Is that your daughter?" She remembered Saren's hand hovering, afraid to touch. Maris realized that whatever had taken Saren for 7 years might not have been a single villain. It might have been a system that fed on silence, money, and respectable faces. And if that was true, then returning Saren to the Meridian without Maris was not just cruelty. It was strategy. The first ally Maris chose was Cass Lorne, the only adult who treated the harbor like a living thing instead of a backdrop for photographs. Cass ran a community radio workshop out of a shipping container painted bright yellow and parked behind a fish market. The workshop was mostly for bored teenagers who wanted to learn how to DJ, but Cass let Maris sit in the back with her notebook and questions. "You're too young to be here," one teen complained. Cass shrugged. "Then be older," Cass told the teen, and turned to Maris. "What do you want?" Maris held up her radio. "I want to hear what people think no one hears," she said. Cass whistled softly. "That's a dangerous hobby," Cass said. "So is being alive," Maris replied. Cass laughed, a real laugh, and handed her a set of headphones. Over weeks, Maris learned how Alderport's frequencies layered like sediment. Emergency bands, maritime chatter, private security channels disguised as maintenance, encrypted bursts that sounded like insects. Cass taught her what was legal and what was not, and Maris listened carefully, because legality and morality were not the same thing. One evening, after the workshop, Cass walked Maris back to the transitional home and said, "You're angry." Maris stared at the pavement. "Anger is useful," she said. "It keeps you upright." Cass nodded. "It also burns you down," Cass said gently. "So choose what it's for." Maris didn't answer. She already knew what it was for. Find Saren, prove the Meridian was not safety, and break whatever leash Ingrid held. But Maris also began to feel something else, something she mistrusted because it felt like warmth. Cass never asked Maris to be grateful. Cass never flinched when Maris spoke bluntly. Cass treated her as a person, not a headline. That, too, was dangerous. Attachment created leverage. Maris made a note to herself. Do not let kindness become a trap. Then, in smaller handwriting, she added, unless it becomes a bridge. The bridge appeared in the form of a message, one short transmission that slipped through the cracks of Ingrid's controlled world. It happened on a Tuesday when Maris was soldering a new coil for her radio in the library's back room. The static shifted. A woman's voice, hoarse and urgent, broke through. "Maris," it said, "if you hear this, do not answer on this channel. They are listening. I am not safe. I am trying to be brave, but I am tired." Maris's hands froze. The voice continued, faster now, as if Saren was racing a countdown. "There is a ledger. Ingrid calls it the Salt Ledger. It's in the Archive District, in a storage unit under the Foundation's name. It's why they can't let you near me. It's why I can't claim you without destroying myself and everyone who helped me come back. I am sorry. I love you. I mean it. The transmission cut. Maris stared at the radio like it had become a living mouth that had just spoken a forbidden prayer. Mr. Sue, at the door, saw her face and said nothing. He simply locked the room from the inside. An action that told Maris he understood more than he revealed. Maris's breath came in sharp bursts. Her mother loved her. Her mother was not abandoning her out of disgust. Her mother was trapped by something with a name. The Salt Ledger. Maris wrote the words in her notebook until the pencil tore the paper. Then she forced herself to breathe slowly. In the camps, panic got you hurt. In Alderport, panic would get you outmaneuvered. She took the radio to Cass's workshop that night and played the recording. Cass's face drained of color. "That's Saren," Cass whispered. "How did she—" Maris cut her off. "Archive District," Maris said. "Storage unit, Foundation name. We find it." Cass rubbed her forehead. "If you step into this, they will come for you," Cass said. Maris looked up. "They already did," she replied. "They just used nicer words." Priya, when Maris told her, went still. "If there is documented evidence," Priya said carefully, "we can go to investigators." Maris nodded. "We will," she said. "After we make sure the evidence can't disappear." She had learned that truth without protection was just bait. They planned the way people plan when they have no power. With detail. Cass borrowed a delivery van from the fish market owner, an old man who hated the Vale Foundation because its waterfront redevelopment had raised his rent. Mr. Shu printed maps of the Archive District's alleyways and marked camera blind spots based on the city's public safety feed. Priya, risking her job, pulled the Foundation's public filings and found the storage unit contract. It was under a shell company called Meridian Wellness Holdings, which sounded like meditation, not crime. Maris studied the paperwork and noticed patterns. The same notary stamp repeated, the same 2 witnesses, the same address used for different subsidiaries. "They copy themselves," Maris murmured, "because they think no one checks." On the night they chose, the fog returned to the harbor, as if Breaker Strait had followed Maris inland. The Archive District was a maze of brick warehouses and rusty rails, streets smelling of old salt and diesel. Cass parked the van near a row of storage units fenced in by chain link. A security camera rotated with sleepy confidence. Mr. Shu's map said it had a blind spot every 11 seconds when it swept past a crooked lamppost. Maris counted in her head. 1, 2, 3. On 9, she moved. Cass cut the chain with bolt cutters. Priya kept watch, phone ready to call if needed, though they all knew police could arrive as threat as easily as help. Inside the unit, stacked cardboard boxes rose like a cheap monument. A metal filing cabinet sat in the back, locked. Maris knelt and listened. "It's a standard lock," she said. "Cass, your hairpin trick?" Cass snorted. "That was a joke I told teenagers," Cass whispered. "Not a skill." Maris reached into her pocket and pulled out a bent nail she'd kept since the camps. She slipped it into the lock with the calm focus of muscle memory. She had picked locks before, not for theft, but for escape. The lock clicked. The cabinet opened. Inside were folders wrapped in plastic, labeled with dates, ports, initials. One folder read Salt Ledger. Maris's hands shook as she lifted it. The pages inside were dense with numbers and names, but not the names of victims, names of donors, shipping companies, private security firms, hospitals, judges, politicians, people who wrote checks and received favors. Evidence of a network that wore philanthropy like a mask. Priya's face went pale as she scanned a page. "This is enormous," she breathed. Cass swore softly. Maris flipped to the last section and saw a list titled Contingencies. Under it, a line. "If asset returns with child, activate separation protocol." Another line, media narrative, trauma trigger. Another, payoffs to ensure compliance. Maris swallowed hard. They planned for us, she whispered. They planned for me. Footsteps sounded outside. Cass stiffened. Priya whispered, get it and go. Maris shoved the ledger into her backpack, grabbed 2 other folders at random, and they slipped out through the gap Cass had cut. They reached the van as the security camera swept back, its red light blinking like an eye. The engine coughed, then caught. Cass drove with headlights off for 3 blocks, turning through alleys, following Mr. Shu's map until they reached a busy street where they could blend into traffic. Maris clutched the backpack on her lap and felt the weight of paper like a weapon. She had wanted proof. Now she had it, and she understood the cost. Once you hold a ledger, you become a threat to everyone it implicates. The next day, Ingrid's people began to circle. It started small. A black car parked across from the transitional home, engine idling. Then a man in a Foundation windbreaker showed up at North Lake Primary, with a smile and a box of flyers about internet safety and community support, asking the principal about Maris's attendance. The principal, flattered by attention, almost answered until Mr. Shu happened to be there, returning a stack of books, and said, "We do not share information about children with strangers." The man's smile tightened. "We're not strangers," he said. "We're family." Mr. Shu stared at him until he looked away. That afternoon, Priya received a formal complaint accusing her of professional misconduct. Cass's radio container was visited by city inspectors who cited electrical hazards and threatened to shut it down. Maris watched the pressure build like a tide. "They're testing our seams," Cass said. Maris asked, "What do we do?" Priya's voice was low. "We go public," she said. Cass shook her head. "If we go public without protection, they will spin it," Cass argued. "They have money. They have media. They will call it stolen, forged, traumatized confusion." Maris opened the ledger and pointed to a page with a list of journalists paid under the table. "Not all media," Maris said. "Only the ones in their pocket." She flipped to another page. "We need investigators who aren't on this list." Priya exhaled. "There's a federal task force," she said. "They're slow, but they're outside Alderport's politics." Maris looked up. "Then we feed them," she said. That night, Cass broadcast a special episode from a backup transmitter Maris built in the library. A story about the rescue, about how survivors were turned into symbols, about how philanthropy could hide violence. Cass did not name Ingrid or the Foundation. Instead, Cass played a recording of Saren's voice saying, "There is a ledger." The broadcast spread, shared by activists, fishermen, teenagers, anyone who hated the way Alderport polished itself. Ingrid responded with a statement the next morning. "We are aware of irresponsible rumors exploiting Saren Vale's trauma. The Vale Foundation condemns misinformation." The statement did not address the ledger. It did not deny the shell company. It promised an internal review. Priya forwarded copies of the ledger to the federal task force through encrypted channels, each file split into pieces and stored in multiple places. Mr. Shu's library server, Cass's transmitter logs, a secure cloud account under a fake name. Maris insisted on redundancy. "If they take one," she said, "another survives." Priya looked at her and murmured, "You shouldn't have to think like this." Maris replied, "Yet I do. They tried to take Maris that week. Not through courts. Courts took time. They tried through fear." One evening, as Maris walked from the library to the transitional home, a van slowed beside her. A window slid down. A man's voice said, "Maris Vale, your mother wants you. Get in." Maris stopped walking. Her heart hammered, but her voice stayed even. "My mother would not send a stranger in a van," she said. The man's smile was too wide. "She's in trouble," he said. "We're helping." Maris lifted her radio so the man could see it. "I recorded your voice," she said. "If I scream, 3 people will hear it." The man's smile vanished. The van lurched forward, tires spitting gravel. Maris did not run. She walked the remaining blocks with her hands shaking inside her pockets, repeating a rule from the camps: "Do not let them see you break." When she reached the house, Priya was waiting, face tight. "We're moving you," Priya said. "Tonight." They relocated Maris to Cass's spare room above the fish market, a cramped space that smelled of smoked mackerel and engine oil. It was not comfortable, but it had something the transitional home never had: chosen loyalty. Cass made tea. Mr. Shu brought a sleeping bag. Priya sat at the small kitchen table and said, "The task force will arrive in 2 days." Maris stared at the ceiling and whispered, "2 days is a long time." Cass squeezed her shoulder. "We hold," Cass said. That night, Maris dreamed of the sea again. In the dream, the fog spoke with Ingrid's voice, telling her she was an inconvenience, a trigger, a complication. Maris woke with her mouth tasting of metal and climbed to the roof. From there, she could see the lantern buildings and, far beyond, the harbor's dark water. Her radio crackled. A coded voice spoke. "Meridian wants the loose end tied." Another voice replied, "The child is the loose end." Maris's hands went numb. She pressed the record button anyway. Then she whispered into the night, to no one and everyone, "I am not a loose end. I am a knot." The confrontation came not in a courtroom first, but in a music hall. The return concert series opened with glittering lights and a sea of donors wearing black. The program described Saren Vale as a miracle. Ingrid stood at the stage edge like a conductor of applause. Maris, disguised in a hoodie and knit cap, entered through the staff door with Cass and Priya. Mr. Shu stayed outside with a backpack full of duplicates and a phone ready to livestream if needed. They had not planned to attend the concert. They had planned to survive until the task force arrived. But then Saren sent another transmission. A broken whisper. "They're making me play." In the camps, forced performance had been punishment. Maurice could not bear the thought of Saren being displayed again, so they went. Backstage, the air smelled of hairspray and fear. A stage manager tried to stop them. Priya flashed her credentials. Cass waved a clipboard like confidence. Maris simply walked as if she belonged there, because sometimes belonging is a mask you put on to pass through gates. They reached a dressing room guarded by 2 private security men in Foundation badges. One looked at Priya and frowned. "You're not on the list," he said. Maris stepped forward and said, "I'm on my mother's list." The guard blinked at the audacity. Cass, behind her, murmured, "Now." Mr. Shu, outside, cut the building's backstage camera feed with a simple loop he'd prepared. The hallway's screen froze on an empty corridor. In that brief blindness, Priya pushed the door. The room inside was lit softly. Saren sat at a vanity mirror, hands on her lap, wearing a long black dress. Her face was pale. Her eyes were too bright. When she saw Maris, she jolted, as if struck. "No," Saren whispered. "You can't be here. She'll—" Maris crossed the room and took Saren's hands. "I'm here," she said. "We have the ledger." Saren's breath caught. "You found it," she said, disbelief and terror tangled. "Yes," Maris said, "and I recorded them trying to take me." Saren's eyes filled with tears. "They will ruin you," she said. Maris's voice softened. "They tried," she said, "but I have people." Saren looked at Cass and Priya as if seeing allies for the first time. The door behind them slammed. Ingrid stood there, expression like ice. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Ingrid smiled slow, perfect. "Maris," she said, as if tasting the name like something sour. "This is inappropriate." Saren flinched at Ingrid's voice. Ingrid's eyes flicked to Saren and hardened. "You were doing so well," Ingrid said. "Why invite the trigger back into the room?" Maris's anger rose, hot and clear. "I'm not a trigger," she said. "I'm your evidence." Ingrid's smile cracked. "You're a complication," Ingrid hissed, dropping the public tone. "A mistake that crawled back to embarrass us." Saren's hands tightened around Maris's. "Stop," Saren whispered, voice shaking. Ingrid ignored her. "Do you know what you cost?" Ingrid said, stepping closer. "Do you know how much money it takes to keep people quiet? To keep donors steady? To keep prosecutors looking the other way? Your existence makes everything messy." Maris stared at her and said, "Messy is when you spill paint. This is blood." Ingrid's nostrils flared. She glanced toward the hallway. "Security," she called. Priya stepped between them. "If you call them," Priya said, "this becomes an incident. Cameras, police, headlines. Is that what you want?" Ingrid's eyes narrowed. "You think you can threaten me with visibility?" Ingrid said. "Visibility is my art." Maris reached into her hoodie and pulled out a small recorder, pressed play. The room filled with Saren's earlier transmission. "There is a ledger." Ingrid's face changed just for a second into something raw. Fear, Then it vanished behind rage. You stole private communications, Ingrid snapped. That child is unstable, she added, louder, as if rehearsing for witnesses. She is manipulating Saren. Saren's voice rose, suddenly strong, slicing through the room. Enough, Saren said. All of them froze. Saren stood up, swaying slightly, and faced Ingrid. You used my trauma as your brand, Saren said. You used my silence as your shield. Ingrid's eyes flashed. I saved you, Ingrid said. Saren laughed, a bitter sound. You saved your foundation, Saren replied. You saved your image. You did not save me. Ingrid's voice turned sharp. You can't even hold a fork some days, she said. You think you can raise a child? You think you can fight this network? I built it to keep you alive. Saren's gaze dropped to Maris and then lifted again. You built it to keep me owned, Saren said. And now you will watch me walk out. Ingrid lunged, as if to grab Saren's wrist. Maris moved faster, stepping between them. She raised her radio and said, The task force is on its way. Ingrid's eyes widened. No, she whispered. Sirens sounded faintly outside, not the city's usual distant wail, but closer, purposeful. Cass's phone buzzed. Mr. Shu's message. Federal units at front. Ingrid backed up a step, recalculating. She pasted on her public smile and said, Saren, darling, you're overwhelmed. Let's talk after you perform. Saren shook her head. I won't perform for you, she said. Then she looked at Maris, eyes trembling. If I go with you, Saren whispered, they will drag my name through mud. Maris squeezed her hand. Then we bring boots, Maris said. Saren blinked, and the corners of her mouth lifted for the first time in years. It was small. It was real. It was enough. They left the music hall through the loading bay as agents entered through the front. Badges flashed, questions fired. Priya gave statements. Cass handed over recordings. Mr. Shu delivered the duplicated files like a quiet courier carrying an avalanche. Ingrid was questioned on camera, her composure tested. She tried to speak in the language of philanthropy, but the agents did not respond to charm. They responded to documents. Alderport watched, hungry again, and for once the hunger pointed upward instead of downward. The investigation did not end in a single dramatic arrest. It unfolded in hearings and sealed affidavits, in late-night raids on warehouses, in bank accounts frozen and reactivated and frozen again. Some people ran, some tried to bargain, some claimed ignorance with expensive lawyers. Saren testified from behind a screen, voice steady, hands shaking. Maris sat in the back of the room with Cass and Mr. Shu and learned that justice was a slow machine that could be jammed by money unless you kept feeding it evidence. Ingrid attempted to frame herself as another victim, a sister forced to make hard choices. The ledger disagreed. So did the recordings. So did the shipping logs. When the Foundation's shell companies were exposed, donors pulled away in disgust, pretending they had not enjoyed the glamour. Alderport's lantern buildings still shone at dusk, but now, when Maris looked at them, she imagined the light as interrogation lamps rather than candles. Saren did not move back into the Meridian. She moved into a small apartment above the fish market, where the walls were thin and the neighbors loud, and where no gatekeeper decided who could visit. She had days when she could not leave bed, and days when she walked to the harbor and stood staring at the sea as if negotiating with it. She began therapy with a clinician chosen by herself, not by Ingrid. She began writing music again, not for concert halls, but for a community station Cass helped reopen after inspectors backed off under federal scrutiny. Saren's first composition after 7 years was not a grand return. It was a 3-minute piece recorded on a battered keyboard, the melody shaped like fog lifting. She titled it Blanket First, in honor of the patrol boat moment when Maris asked for warmth before attention. The piece played on the radio at sunrise, and fishermen paused mid-knot to listen, hands stilled. Maris, meanwhile, returned to school under a different kind of gaze. Some students now treated her like a hero. Maris hated that too. Heroism was another costume adults used to simplify children. She asked Mr. Shu for harder books. She asked Cass for more frequencies. She asked Priya what it would take to ensure no other child was called a loose end. Priya said, "It takes years." Maris said, "Then we start now." They started a program at the library, teaching kids basic radio repair, digital privacy, and how to document what adults insisted was invisible. The program's slogan, chosen by Maris, was simple: Listen, record, share, protect. At the first session, a small boy raised his hand and asked, "Why?" Maris looked at him and said, "Because people who do bad things rely on you thinking you are alone." Saren watched Maris teach and cried quietly, not from pain, but from the strange ache of witnessing the child she had once tried to protect by distancing. One evening, months later, Saren and Maris walked along the harbor. The fog was thinner now, the water choppy. Saren stopped and faced Maris. "I thought I had to choose," Saren whispered. "Me or you, healing or motherhood, survival or love." Maris's face softened. "They taught you that," Maris said, "so you would always choose what benefited them." Saren nodded, tears shining. "I'm sorry," she said. Maris exhaled slowly. "I don't need you to be perfect," she said. "I need you to be here." Saren reached out then, no hesitation, and pulled Maris into her arms. Maris stiffened for a heartbeat, old habits protesting, and then she let herself lean in. The embrace did not erase the past. It did not cancel the years of hunger and fear, but it did something quieter and more radical. It refused the lie that a child can be an embarrassment, a trigger, a complication, a receipt. Maris was a person. Saren held her like one. Above them, the lantern buildings glowed, and for the first time, Maris did not feel watched. She felt witnessed.